Welcome back to another video, and this topic is going to be mainly about geometry. Now, geometry, we have a lot of different topics, and all of those different topics all similarly go along the geometric lines. So, our first point of basis would be points, lines, and planes. So now, when we hear all of those terminology, there's going to be more that we can classify as. But we can say that a point is just something like a point of coordinates or a point on a graph, right? So now a point, let's say point P, right, would look like this. This is called a point. There is no actual size to that point, but it's only telling you, oh, what position it's in. And then our next one is going to be the line. By just thinking about what a line is, right? You might just think that, oh, it's just or horizontal beam or something like that. But in geometry, a line is basically it extends forever in each of its direction. So let's say we have line AB, right? We're gonna draw our points A, and then we're gonna draw a point B here. And don't forget about the arrows at the end for a line. That is mainly what a line is. But what if we said we get rid of the arrows at the end, making it non-continuous? That would just be called a segment. A segment of, let's say, C and D, right? Segment C to D. C, D, right? So that's how we classify all of those. But what happens if we have a line but it only has one arrow? That is what we call a ray. A ray is when something only extends in one direction infinitely. So let's say it's ray EF, right? E, and then it extends all the way to F. Basically meaning that it passes through F, it goes through F, and it goes to like an infinite place, right? So we have all of these, and of course, lastly, a plane, however, it's just a flat surface that is extending forever in this case, right? Once you get into like 3D coordinate systems, you're gonna see a lot of planes, but a plane, just know that it's a flat surface of any kind. So now how do we actually write this in notation form, right? So point P, right? Some people write it differently. So for point P, what I usually like to write is just P with the dot on top, which is just this notation right here. Some people like to write it as just point P necessarily, so point P, right? I like to write it with the P on the top, I mean the dot on the top, just because it looks a little bit easier to read like that. And mainly on the regions, it's just gonna say point P or something like that. But continuing on to the line, we need to understand how to write that as a notation form. Now, we look at the picture of what is represented, and we know that there's going to be two arrows and there's a horizontal line in the middle, right? So now, by thinking about how it should be, we should at least know its endpoints. Well, the points that the line passes through, and also signifying that it's a line with arrows, right? So in this case, we have points A and B as like the farthest points from each other, right? So it's gonna be AB. Now this gets a little tricky now. Since we said that we have to have two arrows in a line, right? Then we just put two arrows in a line. It's it's that simple, right? Now continuing onto a segment, as you probably seen the pattern that's going on with the line, right? We can signify this as a segment CD, right? CD with the line on top. That just shows that, okay, there's two endpoints. The endpoints are C and D, right? And lastly, we have array, and of course, the whole entire point of it, right? How we're gonna figure this out with everything. We have one arrow, 2 points that we can use to signify it, and it'll just be the array of EF. That is how simple it is. Now, I'm going to give you some examples, and let's see if we can figure out if this is a point, a line, a segment, or array. So our first example is this. And also make sure that you write the notation for it as well. Our second one is this. Our third one. And then of course our last one that we haven't done yet. Alright, take a moment here and pause the video and see if you can figure this out and see what the notation is and um, what the whole entire segment is. So notation and type. Hopefully you just pause the video and took a look at this and you figure out what the notation and what the type is. So for our first one, we can definitely know that it's a point, right? It doesn't have any size to it, but it does have a position on a graph, right? So we can name this point A, or as I like to write it, A with the point on top, right? Now for the second example here, we see that it has two endpoints. The endpoints are B and C, and the whole entire section has no arrows, so it's non-continuous. So we know that it's a segment. So we can write segment BC with the bar on top. Now for the third example, we see we have 3 points, right? But as mentioned before, we only want the two farthest points, right? So the two farthest points are E and G. And in this case, it has only one arrow, so it's continuously infinite on one side, meaning that it's a ray, right? So we can just write ray of EG. Yeah, this is a ray. And lastly, we have number 4, which shows us two arrows and one connecting segment. So it's connecting the points A and C. So we can tell that that's a line, AC. So now that is how we can understand all of this, of the lines, and then you got like raised segments. And these are gonna come up a lot when you get into shapes and proofs, because a lot of it is in notation form, because it's taking way too long for everyone else to write the full entire verse of the word. So like if it was a test and you had to write segment BC, right? You just use this. You just use the example shown in number 2, where we have the bar on the top, right? You're not gonna write segment BC, right? That's gonna be taking too long, right? You just write BC with the bar on top. That's it. So, yeah, that is how we define all of these terms. So make sure that you guys keep on practicing, and I'll see you guys in the next video.